Hi everyone, welcome to the Global Research Network. My name is Bauyrzhan Zhanadilov. I am a junior fellow of the ADR Think Tank program. Our program focuses on settled issues of arbitration, mediation, and other forms of ADR processes arising regionally or globally to proffer new ideas on the development and promotion of ADR mechanisms as effective methods of resolving international disputes. Under this program, we are launching a series of webinars, and today our first webinar is Underrepresentation in International Arbitration, Challenges of Arbitrator Representation from the Global South countries. During this webinar, our incredible panel of speakers will address diverse issues and factors that enhance or hinder young legal practitioners from their entry into international arbitration practice to the appointment of arbitrators through the lens of the Global South situation. Before we start, I would like to shortly introduce our panel of speakers. Dr. Kabir Duggal. He is an attorney in Arnold & Porter's New York office focusing on international investment and commercial arbitration and public international law matters. He has an extensive experience by serving as arbitrator and counsel. He's also a lecturer in law at Columbia Law School and the co-founder of Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers. Ms. Elizabeth Shin. She is a foreign legal counsel in the International Arbitration team at Lee & Co. She represents global corporations, leading domestic conglomerates, and high net worth individuals in cross-border disputes. She mainly focuses on IP and technology, construction, and investor-state disputes. She is experienced in conducting cases under all major international arbitration institutional rules, such as ICC, LCIA, SIAC, KCAB, and SCC. Our moderator is Dr. Emilia Onyema, the fellow of our think tank program. She is also a professor of international commercial law at Socio University of London, where she teaches international commercial arbitration and international investment law. She is qualified to practice law in Nigeria and as a solicitor in England and Wales. Her research interests focus on the development of international arbitration in Africa and the engagements of Africans in international arbitration. She has an extensive experience as presiding, co and sole arbitrator, and as expert witness in international commercial arbitration. On this note, I would like to provide the floor to Dr. Onyema. Dr. Onyema, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. And so a warm welcome to everybody, wherever you are tuning in from and wherever you're watching us from. And so we welcome you to our very first webinar. I'm very, very delighted that I'm being joined by Dr. Duggal and Ms. Shin. And you've heard a little bit, just a teeny weeny little bit about both of them. So we will put a little bit the links to their fuller CVs on the chat function. And please feel free if you do need to get in touch with them. I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you. So we're going to kick off our discussions. We want you to please participate, ask questions, whatever it is that you're not very sure about, please ask us questions. We're here to try to answer the question. Elizabeth and Kabir will speak from their own experience. So they're not telling you something in the textbook. They're going to tell you what is not in the textbook. And that is really, really important. And that's the value that we can bring to these discussions. I'm also going to sort of chip in if they ask me to, I would say something if necessary. So I'm going to start with Kabir. I'm going to ask Kabir to help set the scene for us. We talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion. But if you look at me, for example, I'm a woman, so that's gender. I am Black, that is, I don't know what. I'm an academic and I'm also a professional. So how do we relate and unpack this whole idea about diversity for us? Kabir.
Thank you so much, Professor. Let me just start off by saying how honored I am to be here. Let me also just echo, I think, what our colleague said in the introduction. Professor Onyema is a force of nature. There is only one Professor Onyema on the planet, and it's really an honor to be on the stage with you, so to speak, the virtual stage. Professor, this is such a profound question that you have asked. And I just start off with an initial obvious comment. We are in an international practice, and our practice must reflect this international reality. But it doesn't. And we're seeing the issue of diversity and inclusion gaining some traction. It began with the discussion on gender. Now, this has existed for 20, 30 years, right? Arbitral women, but the lack of women, completely unacceptable. And despite this existence and awareness of gender, we're far from the reality of having equality when it comes to gender. I also put a small footnote here, Professor, and I would love to hear your reaction to that. When we're talking about gender, intersectionality becomes so important. I think the gender dialogue, which is very important, often tends to focus on gender in the abstract. And that often tends to mean, I don't think the people involved in the motion mean to exclude women of color. But for intersectionality, when we're talking of diverse women, it is very important for us to be talking about women of color, of trying to talk about women of color who may be LGBTQ or maybe a linguistic minority. We need to be thinking more consciously of that. But we have some recognition, at least, about gender. I think last year, with the horrible events that happened in the US, there has been some focus put now on race. So we're seeing gender and race as the two big buckets that our field is sort of talking about. But diversity and inclusion does mean a broader understanding of all underrepresented groups. And I just put some of the other areas that we should think about. Disability, differently abled people. That's another area we need to think about. The ICC has recently put a call for a task force, which is much needed. We had this article by Simon Maynard from the UK talking about his own experiences, and that's one area we want to think about. LGBTQ issues, again, we're seeing very nascent efforts, but something we want to be thinking about. Socio-economic realities, right? This is an area we often do not talk about, but if we look at the profiles of most people in this field, they tend to be the same. You have gone to certain schools in certain countries, no matter what your gender, no matter what your race, it tends to fit a very specific profile. And that's, again, how do we get in, people who are very qualified, but have not been privileged enough to go to certain schools. That's another area. A final area, related to, our disability, but slightly different, mental health. Our profession is a demanding and a tough profession, and we often take mental health for granted. But that's another area I think we need to be thinking long and hard about, because a lot of people who may appear fine may have issues that we do not see. These are some areas I see. Professor, I'm going to look at you to see what have I missed. You are the authority. Tell me what I have gotten wrong.
Before I tell you, I think there's something just looking at our panel, our panel of young colleagues. Yeah. And this whole idea of us thinking that, you have to be over 60 or heading towards 80 retirement before you can get appointed. But I know you have that tucked somewhere in your sleeve. I'm going to turn to Elizabeth to hear if she has, if she agrees with you, and if she has any additional comments. Elizabeth, please.
Thank you, Emilia. Yes, I think I would have to agree with Kabir and his very insightful comments. gender, disability, age, ethnicity, these are all factors we have to be aware of and address when we talk about diversity. And I couldn't agree more. We're talking about international arbitration, and it needs to become more international. It needs to be more diverse. It's not where we want it to be, but I am slowly seeing progress. For instance, in Asia, we're slowly making progress in terms of gender discrimination. Age, I think less so. I think it's a slow progress. And I would have to say disability even more so. But because there's slowly more talk of diversity and people becoming aware that these are issues that need to be talked about and addressed, it's slowly changing. We're not quite there yet, but it's slowly changing, and I think that's a very positive sign, especially in Asia, where gender equality was not so great, you know, even 10, 20 years ago. We've come a long way. So yeah, I mean, there's still work to be done, but I would like to put a slightly more positive view on this issue, and hopefully we can see progress.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I suppose what we're trying to ask ourselves in this webinar, and the very first question is, who is or what does international arbitration look like? And if international, so I'll just go back to what Kabir and Elizabeth, what they've both actually said. So if international arbitration looks like the clients, then we want to test what we currently have against that. And so when we look at the arbitrators that we appoint, when we look at those who act as counsel in arbitration, when we even consider the location where arbitrations, international arbitrations are seated, and then we think of the arbitral institutions that we hear about, you know, there's this talk about this Big 10, which I really try to push back on. And then we hear that, the key question then becomes, where do the clients come from? What we have, is it representative of our clients and where the clients come from? Because the clients are the users of the process. I think one thing that Elizabeth mentioned is this whole idea that diversity is become like a buzzword. Everybody, every sector is talking about diversity, you know, and one of the, even in politics, so one of the things the West is pushing for with Afghanistan is the rights of women, you know, so we can see that diversity is spreading a little bit. So let me come back to you, Elizabeth. You are female, you are South Korean, and you were educated partly in England. And so the question I have for you is, these diverse factors of yours, your own personal diversity factors, have they enhanced or hindered your progress or progression or access into international arbitration practice? And I'm going to ask Kabir the same question.
Thank you, Emilia. I think that's a very interesting question. And I think there are two elements to that question, really. One about being a South Korean and another about being a female practitioner. So if I can address the gender issue first. Like I mentioned earlier, I think Korean law firms have been making a genuine effort to tackle gender discrimination in the past few years. And we've seen great progress. In our team, for instance, we have about half the team composition is half male, half female. So that's a pretty impressive ratio for a Korean law firm. And in other top 5 law firms in Korea, I know that there's a female co-head of an arbitration department. We are beginning to see more female partners being promoted to partnership, which I think is important for the younger generation to have that sort of role figure. And there are more, there's more participation at speaker events and lectures like today, for instance, with good female panelists. And I think the same is true for arbitrator appointments. We've seen more female arbitrators being appointed in some of the high value cases. Some of the cases that I've been involved in, parties partly encouraged by institutions and councils, they've been more willing to appoint female arbitrators, and they've been happy with the results. So I think that pattern, that new pattern will grow, will continue. So I think personally, so far I haven't really been in a situation where I felt that being a female practitioner has in any way sort of hindered me compared to my male colleagues. So that's my personal experience. Turning to the nationality issue, which I think also ties in with ethnicity and language. So generally, I think being fluent in multiple languages is a huge plus in any environment. And I think that's also the case in international arbitration, if not more so. So English is still very much the main business language here in Asia. And so it's very important having a solid grasp of the language. Being fluent in another language on top of that, I think, is a great advantage. And talking from my personal experience, I was very fortunate to learn English from a very young age, but I also held on to my personal Korean roots as well. So I managed to stay fluent in both Korean and English. And I feel like that sometimes opened doors for me when I was job searching, looking to get into international arbitration. So when I first interviewed for my current firm, they were looking for someone who could speak and write Korean fluently, in addition to writing briefs and written pleadings in English. And I think it's partly because half of our clients are still Korean. So although it's an international arbitration practice, obviously due to the location, and a lot of our clients are Korean. And so it's very important to be able to communicate with them in Korean. And when we have witnesses, for instance, it's important to be able to interview factual witnesses in Korean. So it's definitely an advantage if you can speak the language. And I think looking back, I was given a lot of responsibility from very early on because of this sort of being able to handle both languages. And you learn so much from the interaction, with interacting with clients, and that in turn, I feel, made me grow a lot faster as well in terms of my legal career. So that's one comment that I had. Approaching this from a slightly different angle, I thought I'd mention very quickly a friend of mine back in London. So she's a Korean friend, and she managed to get her foot in the door by applying for a paralegal position requiring Korean language skills. Now, I've witnessed similar cases in my career, but you sometimes get these very large cases where you basically need more hands. In my personal experience, it was when we had a large disclosure matter on our hands produced by the other side as part of document production. And so in those instances, I think language skills are extremely valuable. If you take a job as a paralegal and you can show your seniors that you are capable of solid performance, that could actually lead to a more permanent role. So that's definitely a way in, and I thought I'd just quickly mention that. Yeah, so I think if you apply your language skills and your background and sort of utilize it wisely, I think it could actually be a big benefit rather than sort of a discriminating factor, if you like. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that exposition on, your own diverse characteristics and focusing on language. And in particular, for mentioning this whole idea of getting one foot in the door. There are various ways that people can get one foot in the door. And being a paralegal clearly is one of those. But again, is keeping your eye on the prize, figuring out ultimately what is it that you want to do, what is it that you want to become. I think that young people can figure that out quicker and faster than maybe in my own generation when I left university. And I think that is really important, because instead of just folding your hands, sitting and waiting, you might as well try and get something, get into the door somehow. Kabir.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you, Elizabeth. That was a great answer. A lot of what you said resonated with me. I just begin here with my own view. I am of Indian origin. I was born in the Middle East, educated in the UK, the US, and I live here now. But I do see myself as a proud man of color. I am a man, but I'm very deeply committed to gender justice and gender equality. There are a couple of things that I see when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And Professor Onyema, I remember you telling this statement that has always stuck with me. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And I see a lot of talk when it comes to diversity. I see, honestly, less so when it comes to inclusion. There is definitely a shift. I don't think we can do an event today that is only men. The manels cannot exist today. I think that is progress. That is unacceptable. It was unacceptable when it happened. But today, if you do that, you will rightfully be shamed. But it sort of stops there. It doesn't go beyond that. In the sense, we're not thinking about true diversity and true inclusion of gender at every level. I see that when it comes to race, that is, people of color are still often subjected to a different standard and a higher standard. You want proven excellence as opposed to, I can do it, which you would see with a lot of other communities. If you make a mistake as a woman or a person of color, it can often be the end of your career. And when it comes to things like promotions, there is an invisible, for women, we call it the glass ceiling. For Asians, we call it the bamboo ceiling. Elizabeth, I guess you have a glass bamboo ceiling as an intersectional woman. But we see that for matters when it comes to promotions, it's much harder if you fall into an underrepresented community. And I would like to see much more progress being made there. As you say, Professor, invite us to the party, but also dance with us. Don't just use us as attractive faces for your brochures. On language, two reactions. Elizabeth, I think this is probably true for me. This is probably true for Professor Onyema. We come from former British colonies. So it's slightly different from Korea in that regard. English is at least in the Indian context, seen as the language of privilege, seen as the language of education, seen as the language of the elite. And I feel, I don't want to disparage English at all. It is a global international language, but we need to do better to make sure that, India has over 500 languages, Nigeria has over 500 languages. All of those languages deserve the respect and deserve the inclusion in our international practice as any other language does. It's what you said, what Elizabeth said. The more we're able to speak in the local language, the more we are providing greater access, the more we are making our international practice local, and the more we're making international arbitration better. So I would just encourage, when we're thinking about inclusion, we do think about things broadly. We think about languages broadly. We do not look disparagingly upon our own history and our culture. Yeah, that would be my reactions to that. Professor Onyema, I know I spoke about Nigeria. My sister-in-law was born and raised in Nigeria, but I am by no means an authority about Nigeria. So I would love to hear anything you may have to add.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kabir. You're an honorary Nigerian. I agree with you and Elizabeth. I think the concern I have is the international arbitration community thinking and pushing the narrative that English is the international language for international commerce, which again, it depends. Because the way Elizabeth put it, she said in Asia, English it's important. And that is true. And so if, for example, we look at sub-Saharan Africa, the vast majority of the continent are French speaking. And so that English is not particularly very relevant to the vast majority of the continent. And then we have Arabic, thinking about the Middle East, where Kabir was born. I don't know whether you picked up any shukrams, and shukram just means thank you. I think that's about the only Arabic I know, and I'm at source. But anyway, if we have the whole of the Middle East, I've sat as arbitrator in Middle Eastern arbitrations, and it was in English. And then there were documents in Arabic that needed to be translated. Now, the key thing, I think we all agree with Elizabeth, the more languages one can speak, the better. But does that mean that if you can't speak any of the major European languages, because they're all usually European languages, either English or French, or Spanish, then that's it. Or thanks to Brazil, Portuguese, then that's it. I don't think so. Again, because I speak only English, and I speak, the only European language I speak is English. And so I think that the point Elizabeth makes is, in the locale where you practice, it's important to understand the language. And she's given us examples why. Kabir has said the same thing. But then to deal with international clients, it would be important to access English or French or whatever the dominant European language is for that region. I think Kabir and myself were quite lucky, because I think this is one of the few gains of colonialism, because English is a formal language. So just like Kabir has said, So you go to school in English, you operate in English. And so it's turned out not too bad now. But I think that we need to keep remembering the caveat that Elizabeth put in her comment, which is for her, who she operates from Asia, that for the Asian subcontinent, that or the Asian continent, English is still important. English is relevant. For sub-Saharan Africa, it isn't. And so it's just to be mindful of that. And you know, for English, I say to people, thanks to the Americans, because if the Americans had decided to speak French, maybe Kabir and myself would have been scrambling to desperately learn French so that we can make some good headway in this business. So I think generally we agree that the more languages you're comfortable speaking and you're comfortable operating in, that's great. But core and critical is to understand the language of your locale, where you are located. So having said all of that, and we've sort of looked at language, I want to quickly ask whether, knowing that both of you, you've said to us that you also, you have foreign degrees. And this is becoming a little bit more topical, this question of whether to access international arbitration, you do need to attend one of the universities in the global north. And generally maybe in England or the US, and both of you are guilty of as charged for England and for US. So Kabir, should we start with you? What do you think? Is it necessary to, if somebody who wants to access international arbitration, to try and get a degree, maybe a postgraduate degree from the global north?
So let me just, that's a great question and a difficult one. May I give two sort of responses to this? I think point one in my view is a master's from the global north helps. I do think it does help. This is because I think this is a global reality. Our minds are still colonized. We still attach premium to a diploma from certain schools. And I think we need to decolonize our minds. Although you do get a good education, I'm not going to lie about that. You know, the education you can get at some of these schools is really top class. But the second point that I would make in this regard is that we are probably at an historical moment in our evolution. You're seeing great schools coming up in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America that are able to offer comparable degrees. And to that extent, I would say we're probably now at a stage where things are changing and changing for the better. For this generation that's coming up, they're going to have a lot more choice. Going to the UK or going to the US only allowed a very specific creamy layer from the global south, so to speak. We're using these terms, but you know, everyone couldn't. And this doesn't mean they weren't smart people in Asia, Africa, Latin America. It is just they didn't have the opportunity. They couldn't get a scholarship. They didn't have people to guide them in the process. We are now in some senses democratizing the process. Go to a top school in Asia, go to a top school in Africa and Latin America, and gain an equally competent and valuable diploma. This is how I would look at it. Very curious to see what Elizabeth has to say and what you have to say, Professor Onyema, as somebody teaching in the West.
Thank you very much, Kabir. Before Elizabeth comes on, what is your view? I would want you to link that to the point you made earlier on about socio-economic diversity and exclusion. Because if we're saying, which is the other side of the debate, if we're saying that access to foreign education, let's just put it broadly speaking, to foreign education in the global north is important or is a necessity, are we then excluding those who are not able to afford it? So is it, again, are we going back to an elitist and class system for access into international arbitration? So that if you can give, if you speak to that, then Elizabeth would just round up on all of that.
I think the answer to your very great question, Professor, is yes. Big firms tended to only look at Oxford, Cambridge, University of London, South, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, NYU. It was these sort of schools that you were looking at. I mean, it's 10 schools, but if you're looking at the whole global world, our education is not just limited to these 10 schools. Competence is not just limited to these 10 schools. And the people who can afford to go to these schools, look, there are scholarships avenues. The scholarships are few and far between. The selection criteria is often not fully transparent. You often don't know what is going into the equation as to who is selected or no. I mean, if there's me on one hand and Elizabeth on the other hand, how do you make a determination when our experiences are similar but very divergent? So scholarships is hit or miss. I mean, I fully take your point. It is an elitist system that excludes people, that only allows a creamy layer to gain access and entry. It is a real barrier. It's a real barrier to talent, because talent doesn't depend on 10 schools. Talent depends on getting the avenue and getting the platform to enter the party. This is a barrier that I definitely see as a valid one.
Thank you very much, Kabir. Elizabeth.
Thank you. I think just continuing on from that, I think there's definitely an elitist element which is difficult to carve out completely from a discussion about education, particularly in the context of a legal education. But whether that acts as a barrier to entering into international arbitration, I hesitate to answer, because I think although some of the top law firms do look for, Ivy League, Oxbridge degrees, I think there are more ways to get into arbitration. And if you play it wisely, I think there are opportunities that do open up. So perhaps it's not, well, how do I put this? I think that there might be various barriers that work against you, but it doesn't mean that it's not doable. And I think the more cases we see where, people of color, people of different ethnic backgrounds overcome these barriers, and society as a whole gets to see that there needs to be more improvements made in this aspect, then I think, like I said before, the more we talk about this, the more we advocate for change, that's what starts all the progressions that we've seen in history. So I think that's one element that I just wanted to point out. Just talking purely from my personal experience in Asia, I think a lot of the underlying contracts that I've seen, particularly in the context of construction arbitration, there's still a big tendency to go for English law as the governing law. I sometimes struggle to understand why that's the case, but I think there's a prevailing view that perhaps hasn't been challenged enough, that the English legal system is perhaps well established and reliable. So we see clients wanting to have these English law clauses. And for me, having that educational background in England proved quite helpful. You know, when my superiors were assigning cases, for instance, they were more inclined to put me on the case rather than perhaps someone who studied elsewhere or just purely in Korea. That being said, I have colleagues who have never set foot outside the continent and grew up in Korea, but they're very talented, and I enjoy working with them very much. So I don't think it's vital, but it helps for sure. It can make your life a bit easier if you can afford the education and you have that exposure perhaps to a common law jurisdiction, which is still very much the prevailing sort of system when it comes to international arbitration. So yeah, that's from my personal experience.
Great. Thank you very much, both of you, for the answers. I'm still going to dig a little bit on this. And I do agree. For me, I think that where there is that opportunity, it's just like traveling. You leave your little village and you come to the city, your eyes almost pop out of the socket. It's like, wow, I didn't know that there were things like this, that the world is so large. Then you move, you visit another country and you're like, there are human beings in other places. Wow. You know, it is important because it's part of our learning. And I think that that is important. I think that if one has the opportunity, as long as you keep your eyes on the prize, then it's great. And one of the things that certain educational hubs, like London, for example, we've just been voted, Kabir, we've just been voted the best city to study in. Elizabeth, you did was a good choice to come to London. One of the things that hubs like London, New York have is, again, they're like a place where you congregate people from different places. One of the most amazing beauties of studying here is you get to meet people from all over the world. You actually do. And that is so important because friendships begin to form, understanding other cultures begin to form, just knowing somebody else from another part of the world can be very, very exciting. And that is important because when you just think back to when you want to appoint an arbitrator, who are you looking for? You're looking for somebody who's a team player. You're looking for somebody who has cross-border experience. You're looking for loads who has cultural sensitivity. Those little nuanced and attributes, you're looking for those amongst others. And how do you acquire that? Let's not forget that if you're English and you've never left your little Hampshire or whatever shire, one of the villages, you have no clue what the world is like. It's exactly the same thing that the person, the Indian from his remote part, or the Nigerian from his remote part, or the Asian from wherever, or the Middle Eastern, they feel the same way. And that is, I think we need to keep that in view. So to then move on to our last question before we open up for question, I see we already have one question in the chat, is now we know we have technology and you can do, there are MOOCs all over the place that are for free. You can attend webinars. You can just literally Google anything and you find a free webinar. You can log on to Zoom. You don't need to own a Zoom account to be able to attend events on Zoom platform or any other platform. So there's greater access, if you like. using the digital space and technology. So I want, Elizabeth, I want to come back to you, and I want to ask you, do you think that the progress we've made with technology and the quote and unquote blessings of COVID-19 that is basically forced us to operate in remote fashions is a positive for any young person wanting to get into arbitration at this time?
Well, I think it's definitely a positive, and it's a very clear silver lining to all this COVID pandemic that we've been faced with. I think exactly like you just pointed out, Emilia, we're now able to access various seminars, roundtables, debates, lectures that are taking place all over the world, and time zones and geographical locations, it's no longer an issue. So as long as you're interested, as long as you're keen to participate, all of these great resources are now at your fingertips. So I think it's definitely, for a young practitioner looking to get into this industry, I think it's a huge benefit that they now have. Just looking at the events that are coming up just in Asia, I mean, we have the Korean Arbitration Week, Hong Kong Arbitration Week, and from what I know, these are all scheduled to be online now. So you don't have to be there in person. They probably won't take you now in person, but you can now access and be part of this celebration anywhere in the world. And I think little things that you pick up at these events and seminars, they can actually end up being very valuable. They can be a conversation opener. They could come in handy at various points in your life, at an interview maybe. So I think it's a definite benefit that they now get to enjoy. I think if you're looking for a job in a particular region, though, I think it's better to focus on events that happen in that jurisdiction, so that you can start to sort of compile and build up a network, which I think should be the ultimate aim if you're a young practitioner starting out. Before I came online, actually, I looked up various institutions that have initiatives aimed at younger arbitration practitioners. And in addition to GRN, which I think is a great initiative, you have the ICC Young Arbitrators Forum, you have the HK45, YCARC, and we have the KCAB next as well. And all these institutions, they do online seminars and webinars. So I think if you can take advantage of them, it's a great way to get involved and possibly make new friends as well.
Thank you very, very much for raising that point about young members groups. They're all over. It's almost as though every single grouping has a young members group, and it's great for networking, getting to meet people, getting to know people. Kabir, what do you think? Technology and young people and young practitioners entering arbitration now?
I would agree with Elizabeth that it has definitely made the world much closer. The cost of travel, the cost of visas, which is the reality for many people from the global south, all that has been greatly reduced. I just put it in full fairness, it still entails having good broadband connection and having a laptop, and that is a reality which is still, it still entails some amount of privilege. But everything considered, as Elizabeth had said in her prior answer, it is progress. It is progress in the sense we are taking away, privilege of travel and privilege of, money to stay in expensive hotels and pay conference fees. So I do see that as being a good thing. Just on access, and I just share this in a shameless self-plug, Professor Onyema knows about this because she is an ambassador and was the keynote speaker. But this initiative, Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers, one of our goals is to give scholarships for events. So when events require you to pay, we give scholarships to attend them for free. And we have given 48 scholarships since January for different events. These are posted on LinkedIn. If you just search Racial Equality for Arbitration Lawyers, take a look. There's no membership fee because even $1 is a barrier. And you can, you have to just give this. We try to make it minimally onerous. 100 words why you want to participate. That's it. But take a look, because again, it is for this goal of trying to make our practice more global and more inclusive. I stop here.
Kabir, thank you very much. I was going to come back to Rial, and I must, publicly confess that I stole that your MO on the idea of offering scholarships. And because what Rial did, at least to open my eyes, is the fact that Rial itself can offer the free slots. It does not mean that Rial has to pay for those slots. And that's collaboration. And so if we collaborate and work with people who are organizing events, and they can give either heavily discounted tickets or free tickets that organizations like Rial and ours, which is Arbitration Fund for African Students, can then give out to young practitioners who are not able to pay to attend those events. That is a good initiative. That is really helpful. And sharing it so that some of us can still, we've confessed now, we can borrow the idea and make sure that we share that. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for all the work that Rial has been doing. Now we have a question in the chat. And I think that's a question. Yoriko asked a question. Yoriko says, and this is for Kabir and Elizabeth, are there gatekeepers in international arbitration who would stymie incoming practitioners? Can I expand that and say, are there gatekeepers who can either stymie or support and help to those who want to enter, new entrants into the profession? If we're in our own regions, for example, and if we're not sure, do we think that would be a good thing? And do we know any organization that we can call out and say they can do that? Who wants to kick off? Okay. Kabir, please.
Sure, I'm happy to take a stab at it.
Yes.
Couple of reactions. This is a profound question and a deep reality. Now, we're made to understand that 30 years ago, 3 firms did this. They were key players, and these key players allowed entry and exit. I think arbitration, this is something, we have all been recognizing and we've all spoken about. Our practice has definitely grown, right? We can have somebody like Elizabeth. Korea is obviously a very developed nation, so it's probably still an outlier example, but having a very successful career in Korea, which I think 30 years ago, it was New York, London, Paris, Geneva, probably it ended there. So this is progress. We have better practices all over the world. Let's celebrate that. I will just say the flip side, though, is we still do demand a lot more to enter in this practice. We saw education, higher education and higher education from the West as being an informal barrier. We spoke about English. Now, for us who have had the privilege of growing up and learning English, we take this for granted. But for a lot of people, and this is something what Elizabeth said, which really resonated, right? You know, she had the privilege again to learn English, but many people in Korea may not have that opportunity. That becomes another informal barrier. There are still some of these barriers that I think we could do better in trying to disassemble them, or not taking them as the sole criteria of intelligence. I think it's more that, right? We put a premium on a diploma from the University of London at the cost of a diploma from the University of Mumbai. Or the fact that you only speak English is seen more valuable than the fact that you can speak Arabic and Spanish. I think if we can expand the way we look at things, we will do better. But I will stop there and I will pass it back to both of you to see your reactions.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth.
I think Kabir's comments were very helpful. Just to add a little bit on that, I think there is a tendency in Korea to prefer graduates of various schools. So I think that elitism that we discussed earlier, I think that exists, but to a smaller degree perhaps within the country, and I'm sure there's a similar elitist system in the race-based share as well. So I think that could act as an initial barrier. If you don't meet that requirement, perhaps firms may not be as willing to interview you, or you might be, you know, if you're compared to someone who did graduate from one of those schools, that might work against you. I don't know if there's gatekeeper. I don't know if anything would really stand out as being a barrier specific to Korea. I think all the elements and issues that we discussed, they all apply equally to Korea, but nothing particular springs to mind. I think as long as you're willing to really work at it and go to events and really show you're interested, people will eventually find you. And I think it, at the end of the day, it really depends on you and how willing and devoted you are. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so very much, Kabir. Thank you, Elizabeth. We've come to the end of our 60 minutes. We have a question on moot competition. I'm going to get to that question because I think that that is one very important and practical way that we can access international arbitration. So I'm going to quickly read the question. This moot competition has been making progress when it comes to diversity, both as a meeting place for team members and arbitrators with various backgrounds. I think we would all agree with that. Do you feel that moot alumni have been contributing to these goals in practice since they graduated and began practicing arbitration? So maybe how effective is the moot alumni? And maybe we should broaden that question because quite a number of participants don't bother joining the Moot Alumni Association. And so just friends that you've made at this moot or any other moot. Elizabeth, do you want to kickstart?
Sure. Well, this is a really interesting question because I, as Emilia, I participated in the VSMoot during my LLM, and for me, that was an eye-opener, and that's what really sparked that sort of interest in international arbitration for me. And the funny thing is, I met a lot of people there, obviously, made some good friends. When I started practicing arbitration in Korea, I met people from other law firms, and we were talking, and we realized that we all participated in the V-Smoot. And it was this very sort of amazing moment where we all said, V-Smoot? Me too. And it was sort of that sort of alumni, oh, we belong to the same, V-Smoot. What year were you? I went in 2007, I went in 2008. And I realized that more people than I had realized have been through that process, whether it's the V-Smoot in Vienna or Hong Kong. And I think a lot of superiors have realized that this is actually quite a good way of seeing how interested you are in arbitration. And I think if you've studied at undergraduate level and went on to do an LLM in arbitration, for instance, you're more of an academic until that stage. And then what triggers that shift, perhaps, to becoming a practitioner and giving you that sort of insight into what it's like to practice arbitration, moot competitions can be very, very useful. So I think I would recommend it. And I think moot alumni have, whether they realize it or not, have been very active in promoting the competitions. So it's a very good system that we have. And like I said, I would highly recommend it.
Great, thank you very much. Kabir?
I would agree with everything Elizabeth said. I think moots expose you to a wider audience. If there is no membership free, it's free. You get to meet interesting people, you get to do interesting things. So truly, truly recommend it. We are a profession, and the profession requires us to know people. That's how professions work, and moots expose you to people. On the Alumni Association, this is Uncle Kabir's free advice for the day. Any of these organizations are valuable if you take advantage of them. And by that, I mean if you actively engage with them. So the Moot Court Alumni Association is one avenue. You are going to benefit from it if you engage with it. There is sometimes a tendency, let's sign up for 20 organizations and you don't do anything. And I think that is not helpful. It's better to identify the 2-3 institutions, organizations that you think fit with your values, but engage with them. That's how you derive value and you can excel. But that's just my view on the matter.
Elizabeth is nodding, so I am nodding seriously. So we both agree with your view, and it is massively important. There's no point signing up for every single grouping and you don't show up. You don't know anybody. Nobody knows you. It's a complete waste of your time. And remember that it's an investment you're making, whether you're paying money for it or you are attending events or you're supporting events. It's an investment you're making. And so one of the things that I do personally is at the end of each financial year, I step back and look at all the places I am I'm part of, the places I'm paying money, and ask myself, do a cost benefit analysis. If I'm not getting good returns, that's the end of that one. I put them in the cooler. It is important because your time and resources are finite, and you want to engage and actively participate so that you can benefit from that particular organization as well. So that brings our conversation. Apologies, we are 5 minutes late, and we've overrun by 5 minutes. But again, that's because our conversation has been very, very interesting. And so what we've tried to do is we sort of we started out by identifying the different diversity characteristics, and they will continue to grow. Kabir mentioned a new one, which is this whole idea of mental health. And if we notice, arbitration follows where the general community goes and is at. And so we mentioned the various diverse characteristics, and we talked about intersectionality, which applies to all of us anyway. We then moved on to talk about the impact of obtaining a global education, actually education from the global north. We raised concerns on whether that makes it elitist, and what happens when you have the connection with socio-economic inequalities. And one of the things we do not wish to do is to widen the inequality gap or the brain drain from other jurisdictions. And so it's how do we balance all of those? We then talked about diverse characteristics being an enhancement or a detraction from entry into international arbitration. We moved on to talk about the role of language. I think the key takeaway is as many languages as you can learn. Very important to get on with it, If you can't, that's fine. Be comfortable. If the one you can do is okay. We're not forcing you to learn new languages, but we think that it's an advantage to be able to speak different languages. You have to notice that we didn't say different European languages. That wasn't what we were told. We were told that it's important to speak a language relevant to where you're located or the region. And then we talked about entry for young practitioners, and we gave various ideas and tips, and we ended up with the gatekeepers and what they can do to enhance entry and the moat. So in a nutshell, those are the major headlines of the various things, issues that we talked about. It's left for me to say a huge thank you to Kabir, who is in the US, and to Elizabeth, who is in South Korea. So you can imagine I'm sitting in London, which is fine, and they are, and Elizabeth should be going back to sleep now after this. So thank you so very, very much. We are very, very grateful. And I think that brings our event to a close. Am I correct? I think I am.
Thank you, Professor. It was an honor. This was such a great event.
Thank you very much.
And I feel the same. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very, very much, Elizabeth. Thank you.